Government secrets unleash the life of a government cleaner. Are you ready to dive into the world of government secrets and cover-ups? Join me as I share my experiences cleaning up the messes the government wants to hide. From hunting down failed experiments like Ice Cream Man, the Ripper, and Ghoul, to facing off against dangerous experiments like Mimic and Delilah, this is a journey you won't want to miss. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up for a wild ride through the shadows of government experimentation. And remember, hesitation can be fatal in this line of work. So what would you do if faced with these challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't miss out on more thrilling tales from the world of government secrets. Stay tuned for my next assignment, where danger lurks around every corner. Until then, stay safe and stay curious. They approached me one day after I finished my shift at a fast food joint. I'm not sure I had much of a choice, but my life was so dull that I was ready for any kind of change. The men who came to my door didn't even tell me what I'd be doing, only that if I wanted to aid my country, I should follow them. I didn't look back once. The next year of my life was grueling. I was put through extreme physical and mental training, learning about things I only thought existed in movies. They never mentioned what I was training for not until I graduated. After earning the seal of approval from the higher-ups, I was brought into a small room with black suits who finally informed me of my new job hunting down failed experiments and other oddities the government had failed to contain. Not all jobs would be the same. Some would be relatively easy, while others would be next to impossible. Most missions would come with the option of bringing the target back dead or alive, though bringing them back alive for further experimentation was always preferable. My first assignment was on the easier side, code name Ice Cream Man. Like most failed experiments, the Ice Cream Man was once human. He appeared as your typical ice cream truck driver, but was essentially a robot concerned only with doing his job. The special part about him? His truck. The music from its horns worked like a human magnet, entrancing anyone within hearing distance to approach. Once you approached, you'd buy the ice cream delicious, by all accounts, but the real twist was that anyone who ate it entered a fugue state for the next 12 hours, carrying on their day as normal but remembering nothing the next day. This assignment was simple, a test, perhaps. I was given a pair of enhanced noise-blocking earplugs and sent on my way to the Ice Cream Man's last known location. He wasn't hard to find, just had to follow the massive line of vehicles. After everyone had their ice cream, I lined up myself. He tried to serve me, but I reached into the truck and injected him with a tranquilizer. He may have been just a shell of a person, but he wasn't immune to good old-fashioned medication. I tied him up, hitched his truck to my vehicle, and dropped him off at the nearest government facility, awaiting my next target. My next assignment, however, wouldn't be quite so simple, codenamed the Ripper. Unlike the Ice Cream Man, the Ripper was still mostly human, with emotions and a semblance of his former self. Perhaps that was the problem. Through intense experimentation, he had gained the ability to create an intense, concentrated earthquake. He had collapsed the facility where he was being held, and the main concern was the danger he posed to others if he used his ability in a heavily populated area. Countless lives could be lost. This was one of the few cases where I was advised not to bring the target back alive. The Ripper was more difficult to find, mainly because he wasn't trying to attract attention. But if the government wants you, they will find you. He had relocated to a small town, changed his name, his face, everything in an attempt to escape. I almost felt bad for him. I doubt he had volunteered to be a guinea pig, and now all he wanted was to live a normal life. Once I found the town he was staying in, I made sure to keep my distance. I didn't want him going nuclear on me. I confirmed he was my target by collecting DNA samples from his trash, and all that was left was to take him down. I didn't want to kill him, but I didn't have many options. The scientists who had created him were still unsure of the extent of his powers and his ability to control them. Had I brought him back alive, there's no telling if the government even had a facility capable of holding him. I did what I thought was best. After he returned home one night, I put a bullet between his eyes, It wasn't a good feeling, but I convinced myself it was necessary. I dropped his body off, was thanked for my services, and braced myself for what was next. Would you have done the same in my position? Was there another way to handle a man like the Ripper, or was I right in assuming there was no safe way to bring him back alive? These are the questions I ask myself, but in the end, I know that in this line of work, hesitation can be fatal. The Ripper wasn't a monster, just a man who had been twisted by the government's experiments. But that didn't make pulling the trigger any easier. My next target was something else entirely codenamed Ghoul. This one was truly a monster. I'm not sure what the government was trying to create, but I don't think they got what they wanted. Ghoul had enhanced strength and speed, but with one slight problem: he eats humans. Maybe that's exactly what the government wanted. As you can imagine, Ghoul found a way to escape, like the others. This mission might not have been so bad, but I was given strict orders to bring Ghoul back alive. All my lethal weapons were stripped and replaced with tranquilizers strong enough to bring down a rhino. I requested a partner for this assignment, but of course I was swiftly denied. Ghoul had taken up residence in a forest that had been a popular hiking trail, and disappearances in the area had skyrocketed since his arrival. The government shut down the trail for the weekend, so it would just be me and Ghoul. I set out into the forest, looking for signs of his nest. After about an hour of following markings and footprints, I began to come across scattered human bones. I was getting closer. Then, I began to hear noises, a sign that my date with Ghoul had arrived. He appeared, standing on a large tree, looking down at me. He wasn't big, maybe 5'6", with an average frame, but looks can be deceiving. His skin was sickly yellow, and his hair had begun to recede like an old man's, but he was clearly much younger. His eyes were pure white, devoid of any humanity. Before I could react, he lunged at me, soaring from the tree like a predator. I barely had time to pull out a tranquilizer and shove it into his side. But it wasn't enough. He shrugged it off and took a chunk of flesh out of my shoulder. I struggled, reaching for another tranquilizer, and just before he could go for another bite, I jammed it directly into his neck. He began to bite down on my neck, but passed out before he could finish the job. I pushed him off, secured him with special restraints, and delivered him to the facility. Despite missing a chunk out of my shoulder, I had escaped alive. But this was only one monster that science had created. I can only imagine what my future has in store. What would you have done if you were in my place, facing a creature like Ghoul? Could you have found a way to bring him in without risking your life? Or would you have taken the chance, as I did, to prevent him from causing further harm? After delivering Ghoul, I informed the higher-ups that I would need at least a month off to recover. Given what they had put me through, they obliged. If anything, they were impressed that I'd come back in mostly one piece. Those were just a few of my targets, but I have many more tales to tell. However, that will have to wait. My next assignment just came in, and I must begin preparations. If I survive, I'll be sure to share more. Hopefully, I'll come back in one piece this time. Before I dive into more of my targets, I want to address a few concerns from my last post. A lot of you were worried about the bite I suffered from Ghoul. As far as I know, I haven't contracted anything yet. I was told that whatever they did to him shouldn't be contagious, but I made them run some tests regardless. All came back negative, though they did give me some special pills, supposedly to speed up the recovery of my shoulder. It wouldn't surprise me if they were hiding something from me. I just hope that if I do start craving human flesh, I'll still have enough mental fortitude to pull the trigger one last time. Another thing I wanted to address is who I work for. I only ever refer to my boss as the government because I have no clue what branch this is. It's possible that this isn't the government at all, but I doubt it. They're far too ingrained not to be. It could be the CIA, but I'm not certain. The only questions I ask are the ones that will hopefully keep me alive longer. After my month-long break in recovery from Ghoul, I was given an easier assignment to ease me back into things. Codename Romeo. Romeo was made to be a charmer, and charmer he was. The true Adonis in every sense of the word, Romeo made the statue of David look ugly in comparison. From what I can tell, he was designed to charm women, perhaps foreign diplomats, but in reality, he charms anyone and everyone. That's how he was able to charm his way out of his holding cell. Romeo isn't a danger to anyone, except perhaps himself, should he find himself at the hands of an angry spouse. But I'm sure he could get himself out of that one too. Finding Romeo was easy. Actually, the hard part would be extracting him. He was always surrounded by a crowd, almost like a cult. If there was a high-class party, Romeo would be there, and he would never return to his room with fewer than 10 people following him. I needed a good plan to separate him from his entourage. I decided to attend one of his parties to get a better scope of the situation. It was crucial that I find any openings he might have. What I didn't expect was for Romeo to approach me directly. "Good evening, monsieur. I do not believe we have met before. I am Romeo. And you, monsieur?" he asked with a disarming smile. Was that French? I almost gagged. I guess I should have expected the accent. He had quite the ego, after all. It was good to see his charm wasn't working on me, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it had something to do with my disgust at how perfect he was. "I'm James, and I'm kind of new here." "Nice to meet you, Romeo," I managed to respond. James, what a fabulous name, but alone at a party. Unacceptable. Come with me. My friends and I are about to return to my estate. I will show you the finer parts of the city, he said, flashing a wink. Was that a sexual reference? Regardless, this was going much better than expected. I was making direct contact with my target. If I went to his estate, perhaps I could just wait until everyone fell asleep and sneak away with Romeo before anyone else noticed. I don't know. We just met, and I wouldn't want to impose on you like that, I sighed, trying to play hard to get. No, I insist. Samantha, go with my friend James here and guide him to my home. I will be there shortly. There is someone I must see first, Romeo replied, motioning to one of the women from his group. Samantha did indeed guide me to Romeo's estate. I already knew where he lived, of course, but I had to play dumb. Romeo's estate was a true mansion, with aesthetics that would make someone think it was designed by a master architect in some luxurious game. I was escorted inside, and the rest of Romeo's entourage soon after. I was offered some scotch that had apparently been aged for over 100 years. I'm not much of a drinker, but I accepted it nonetheless. Romeo arrived almost an hour later, fashionably late to his own party. Once he arrived, he immediately approached me. James, follow me. There is something I must show you, he said. I didn't hesitate to follow him. This was my chance to be alone with him. I could tranquilize him and be on my way before anyone else knew better. He led me to a room on the other side of the mansion. The room was something else, something I didn't expect. The walls were covered with pictures of men and women, each one depicting a different persona. I even noticed a few from his current entourage. What is this? I asked, unable to hide my shock. These are all the people I have conquered, and you are the next, Romeo said as he turned his back on me and began removing his clothing. I almost felt compelled to follow suit. His words held so much power, but I resisted. Instead, I approached him and stuck the tranquilizer into his neck. I made sure to duct tape his mouth. I'd had enough of his words for one night. Romeo was much bigger than me, so it took quite an effort to drag him out of the window and back to my vehicle. But I managed to do it before anyone got suspicious. I assumed his friends simply thought he was taking his time with me. I dropped off Romeo and made sure to shower extra well that night. My experience with Romeo made me miss my date with Ghoul, of all things. My next assignment was another fun one, codenamed Kong. So, what happens when you splice human DNA with gorilla DNA? Well, apparently you get Kong. Personally, I would have preferred the name Caesar in reference to Planet of the Apes, but I don't get to pick the names. Kong was essentially a smaller version of Bigfoot. And before you ask, If Bigfoot exists, I have to say that I don't know. I haven't been tasked with hunting him down. Kong was a kill task. There was no guarantee that tranquilizers would work, and even if they did, for how long? Not to mention, Kong had killed 2 scientists when he escaped, so they weren't too worried about bringing him back alive. They just wanted to dissect whatever was left of him. I was given specific parameters to avoid hitting the head, if possible. They mostly wanted to examine the brain, and that wouldn't be possible if I splattered it all over the ground. Another problem I faced was my experience with long-range weapons. It had been part of my training, of course, but I hadn't gone much beyond the basics. I was told that most of my missions would be up close and personal, so long-range training wasn't that important. Well, it seemed very important now. Similar to Ghoul, Kong had taken up residence in a forested area. But since his diet didn't consist of human meat, he had chosen a much more secluded location. I don't think Kong really wanted to hurt anyone. He could have lived out his life in those woods, never bothering anyone. But that's not what the government wanted. My superiors informed me that they had already done overhead sweeps of the area and were able to tell me exactly where the cave he was staying in was located. Of course, they had done the easy part, and I got to do all the dirty work on the ground. I made my way to a vantage point overlooking the cave and set up the sniper rifle they had supplied me with. All I had to do was wait. After a few hours, Kong finally made his appearance. He walked out of the cave and began to stretch his limbs, the way most of us do after waking up. I studied him through the rifle scope, lining the crosshairs over where I assumed his heart was, and pulled the trigger. I missed. I hadn't accounted for the wind, which had picked up since I started waiting, and the bullet strayed to the right of Kong, hitting the rock of the cave. Kong didn't move. Instead, he simply turned his gaze to me, with eyes that were all too human. He didn't try to escape. He knew I would come, and if it wasn't me, it would be someone else. Kong had accepted his fate. Now, I had killed the Ripper, of course, but that was different. I had done that while he was asleep. I didn't have to see the look in his eyes before he died. I almost wished Kong had been a monster like Ghoul that way. I wouldn't have to feel bad about putting him down. But with a slight hesitation, I reloaded my gun, accounted for the wind, and fired once again. Bullseye. Kong went down instantly. I made my way over to confirm that he was dead, and luckily he was. He wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Kong weighed far too much for me to drag back on my own, so instead, I set off a flare I'd been given for this moment and waited for the air team to come and collect him. Seeing Kong's lifeless body really made me question my line of work. I had never felt so disgusted in my life. But I knew there was no way out of it for me. I'm already in far too deep. Perhaps the government has created another monster in me, and someday they'll have to put me down too. But for now, I'm still doing their dirty work. If you'll excuse me, writing about Kong has really brought my mood down. I'll be back, and I'll be sure to include one of my more exciting assignments next time. For now, I think I need to lie down for a bit. Until next time. I'm back, and with me, a few more of my assignments. I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'll jump right into it. First up, codename Delilah. Delilah is, well, a doll. A ventriloquist doll, to be exact. Despite her simple appearance, she's quite dangerous, though probably not in the way you'd expect. She can't move on her own, and while she can speak, that's about it. So no, she won't be running around your home in the middle of the night, stabbing people. Instead, Delilah has an incredibly strong power of influence. One look into her eyes, and she'll have complete control over you. It's ironic, really a ventriloquist doll turning humans into her puppets. In my briefing, I was told Delilah is essentially the definition of sadistic. She enjoys making her victims inflict as much pain as possible before eventually disposing of them. I'm not sure if demons are real, but if they are, I'm sure one is trapped in that doll. Delilah was believed to be staying with a family of 4. She had been taken there by a scientist who had fallen under her control. She'd only been gone for about a week, but who knows what she could have gotten up to during that time. The scientist who had taken her returned to his workplace a day later and had attempted to murder his co-workers. But that was quickly taken care of. I made my way to the family's home, hoping not to be surprised by what I saw. Let's just say I got my wish, but not in the way I'd hoped. I knocked on the front door, and after a few minutes of no response, I turned the handle to find that the door was unlocked. I wish it hadn't been. The moment I stepped into the hall, I was hit with a putrid smell, the unmistakable stench of death. The walls were coated in blood, some of it dried, some fresh and still slowly dripping. I found the family together in the living room. The mother and 2 children were seated in a small triangle. They were already dead, their stomachs cut open, entrails hanging out. They had been posed to make it look as if they were eating their own organs. In the center of the triangle was the father, hanging from the ceiling, his body covered in scratches and cuts. Just before I was about to lose my lunch all over the floor, I heard a voice from the opposite corner of the room. Just in time. "What do you think of my art? It's a little sloppy, but I'm sure it'll get better in time," the voice said. It was Delilah. "Have you come to get me already? I was having such a fun time." "Oh, well, I'm done here anyway. I guess you can take me back now. I'll be out again soon enough," she said mockingly. I made my way over to the voice, keeping my head down. I had no intention of ending up like that family. When I got close, I closed my eyes, picked her up, and flipped her over. I made my way back to the vehicle. "Let me sit up front. I like to have conversations during car rides. Plus, you can't get much action from women in this line of work, so it'll be fun for both of us," Delilah said, continuing her taunts. As much as I wanted to chuck her into the back and throw a blanket over her, I didn't want her out of my sight, so I granted her wish. I carefully sat her up front, turning her head towards the window. I'd be lying if I said part of me wasn't curious about her. I wanted to know more about what makes a monster a monster. "You should just take me home with you. Tell your boss I wasn't here, and I'm sure we could have lots of fun together," Delilah suggested. "Yeah, I'm sure you'd make great kindling for a fire," I responded, trying to keep my composure. "Oh, you're so funny. I like you. I was thinking that I'd have someone kill you eventually, but maybe I'll keep you." "You don't just kill everyone, do you?" Delilah asked, her tone playful yet chilling. "Of course not. I let the really bad ones live. It's more fun that way," she replied. "What do you mean by that? Are you saying I'm a bad person?" I asked, feeling a twinge of anger. Was she just trying to provoke me? "You aren't quite on my level yet, but I see potential in you. You didn't even scream when you saw my work. Maybe you even enjoyed seeing it. You may think we're different, but we really aren't," Delilah retorted. She was partly right. I hadn't reacted when I saw the bodies. I felt a little sick, but if I had seen that a month ago, I would have probably passed out. Whether I liked it or not, I was definitely changing, and I don't think it's for the better. "What are you?" I finally asked after a few minutes of silence. "Look into my eyes and I'll tell you," she teased. "Nice try. I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid," I responded, almost laughing. "What are you afraid of? Do you think you'd see yourself if you looked into my eyes?" she continued. "That's enough. One more word, and I'm Googling where the nearest wood chipper is," I snapped. Those were the last words I spoke during our little road trip. I dropped off Delilah and informed them about the mess at the house. They said they would send someone to clean it up. I was hoping they would give me a break after what I had seen, but I wouldn't be so lucky. As soon as I turned in Delilah, they told me there was a new assignment ready for me, codenamed Jack. What a name, right? This was probably the oddest assignment I had received yet. Jack, from what I could tell, was entirely human. I had no clue why I'd been tasked with finding a human. Perhaps he was a runaway scientist or someone who just knew too much, but he certainly wasn't what I was used to hunting. I was told that Jack was incredibly dangerous, though, and that I shouldn't take any risks in trying to capture him alive. In other words, they wanted him dead. This only made me more curious as to what secrets Jack must have held. Jack was constantly on the move, so it wasn't easy to find him, but my training paid off, and I was eventually able to track him down. I watched him for a few days. He didn't seem dangerous to me. Suspicious and cautious, yes, but not dangerous. One night, he stepped out of his hotel room to get food, so I decided to let myself in. Jack and I needed to have a talk. He didn't seem too surprised when he returned to his room to find me sitting on the couch. He simply held out his arms. So they did send someone for me after all. Go ahead and do what you have to do. I won't fight it, he said. Sit down, Jack. I just want to talk, I replied. Jack raised an eyebrow. Curious one, huh? You know what they say about curiosity, right? He asked. I rolled my eyes and motioned for Jack to sit down. Who are you, Jack? And why did they send me after you? You don't know. I'm you, or at least I used to be. They tell you where to go, who to kill, who to bring back alive, and we do it no questions asked. I couldn't handle it anymore, though, so here I am. And here you are, Jack explained. This took me back for a second. I had known he had to have some connection to my agency, but I never considered he had been in the same position as me. So there really was no way out other than death, that is. I walked across the room, pulled out my gun, and killed Jack. I had the answers I came for. Perhaps Delilah was right, we aren't so different after all. I returned with Jack's body, and I wasn't asked to give my usual debriefing. Instead, I was just given a simple nod and told to go home and wait for my next assignment. I wondered if this was another test. If it had been, I was pretty sure I passed with flying colors. I understand if you all think less of me for the choices I made, but if it wasn't me, it would be someone else. This was the life I had chosen, or perhaps the life that was chosen for me. Regardless, I can't back down now. I'm simply one discardable person in the whole scheme of things. Don't mistake my actions for blind loyalty, though. I know the people I work for aren't good people. I simply know my place in this world. And the minute I stop being useful, I'll end up like Jack. How does that saying go? Better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I am a cog in a giant machine, and once my cog stops working, I'll be discarded and replaced by another. Despite the fact that I risk death every day, I have never felt more alive. I no longer have nightmares of those I've killed. I've stopped caring about things like that. If I become too soft, I'll end up like Jack, and I have no intentions of letting that happen. After disposing of Jack, I was given a week off. It had been a while since I had any time to myself, and it was a bit strange. I never had many friends to begin with, and my work had distanced me from the few family members I had kept in touch with. This week off made me realize just how empty my life would be. Was this what they had wanted? Regardless, I was back at work the minute my week was up, ready for my next assignment. And I got one code name, Mimic, as her name implies. Mimic is a master of disguise. She has the ability to morph her face into a perfect replica of anyone she chooses, but she's unable to change her body. I imagine she's still a work in progress, but can you imagine what the government could do if they could create perfect body replicas of anyone they wanted? Mimic had escaped with a few other experiments, but she was the top priority. It was believed they had all split up, but I was still warned to be on the lookout in case any of them teamed up. Due to her ability, Mimic would be incredibly difficult to locate. Because of this, several hunters like me were given the task of finding her. If our information was correct, she had not made it out of the city we lived in, but if she had, we might never find her. The only way to identify her was by a distinct scar on her left shoulder. The government had set up roadblocks at all the city's exits while U.S. hunters searched within. The 3 other hunters and I were each given a quadrant to search. Mimic had no family, so she would either have to break into somewhere or find an abandoned location to stay. I spent several hours searching the streets of my quadrant, asking strangers if they had seen a suspicious-looking woman, as well as checking out old, decrepit homes that hadn't been lived in for years. I found nothing that was until I was approached by a slender young man, probably in his early 20s. "Are you looking for someone?" the man asked. "Yeah, it's hard to explain. I'm looking for a girl, but I'm not entirely sure what she looks like," I replied. The man chuckled before continuing, "But I may be able to help you. I saw a girl run into an old, abandoned building around the corner. She was acting pretty weird, constantly looking over her shoulder. Maybe she's the one you're looking for." "Thanks, I'll go check right now," I said as I pushed past the man, not giving his words a second thought. I quickly made my way to the building and let myself in. To my amazement, Mimic was actually there, but it wasn't quite what I expected. Mimic was tied to a chair. I knew it was her because her scar was in clear view, and no other hunters had contacted me to say they had found her. So why was she tied up? That's when I remembered who told me where to find her, the stranger. Before I could even turn around, I heard his voice. "It's a gift. She's quite important to them, isn't she?" It was the strange young man I had just met, but he wasn't behind me, he was in front of me, near Mimic. How had he gotten in front of me? I'd almost sprinted over here. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of unease. "That's not important right now. Aren't you going to thank me?" "Oh wait, that's not important either. The real reason I'm here is to deliver a message to you," the man said. A message from who I was truly perplexed. As I said earlier, I made contact with almost no one. "Don't look so confused, friend. It's from your girlfriend. Have you already forgotten about her?" Delilah would be so upset to hear that, the man replied mockingly. I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. Delilah is not my girlfriend. Delilah is a demonic doll that I want nothing to do with unless it involves a large fire. "Where are you going?" I shouted as the man began to walk away, paying me no mind. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, pulling out my tranq gun and aiming it at him. He didn't respond, nor did he stop walking, so I fired. My aim was dead on, but the dart passed right through the man as if he wasn't there. He continued walking up to the wall and proceeded to walk right through it. What the hell just happened? A man appears out of nowhere, leads me to Mimic, tells me Delilah is coming for me, and then walks through a wall. There was definitely something going on with that man, something beyond just knowing Delilah. But I still had a job to do, and my target was right in front of me. I let the other hunters know I had found Mimic, and then took her back myself. I was almost expecting some sort of praise for catching her, but I knew that was unlikely despite her value. I was surprised once again when I made it back to the holding facility. The whole place was in complete lockdown. Well, whatever was able to be locked down after half of the building had been blown off. The facility was located outside of town in a secluded area for obvious reasons, so I knew no innocent people had died, but I did see the corpses of many scientists and guards strewn around the facility. I knew some of them had families, but these people weren't exactly angels. I managed to find one of my superiors who was able to briefly fill me in on the situation. While our forces had been thinned out searching for Mimic, a group had attacked the facility. It was obvious they were looking for a particular experiment, but it's unclear exactly who they were after. At this point, around 20 of the 50 experiments held in the facility had escaped. I tried asking which of the experiments had, but I was told it was confidential. They simply told me to leave Mimic with them and to go home and wait. I would be busy very soon. Part of me already knew at least one of the experiments who escaped Delilah. I was told she was coming for me, so I wasn't surprised. I'm not sure what's about to happen, but it can't be good. It had been a few days since the attack on the facility. I was temporarily sent home while the government sorted out the mess. With half of the building blown off, it wouldn't do much good to start hunting the experiments before we had a place to store them. We'd find them eventually anyway. I was able to sleep for about 4 hours before my phone rang. It was time to hunt down the escapees. Myself and 3 of the other hunters set out to look for Mimic's accomplices. We were given a short list of the experiments that had escaped, and to my dismay, Delilah was on that list. She couldn't move on her own, so it was clear she was with another one of the experiments. But which one? I had no clue. I tried flipping through the pages to see if the man I had seen with Mimic was on the list, but he wasn't. We were able to find about half of the 20 escapees within the first day. Some of the experiments just didn't plan their escape very well, and with nobody to help them on the outside, they were pretty much sitting ducks. There were still 11 at large, though Delilah, of course, among them. I kept hoping that every time we found a new lead, it would be the one carrying Delilah, but unfortunately, that was not the case. After doing a quick sweep of the nearby city with no new results, we were all sent home to rest. The government would go through cameras and contact us if they found anything. They were also calling in reinforcements after the attack, trying to find out who orchestrated it. There was absolutely no way I was going home with a killer doll stalking me. Instead, I made sure that I wasn't being followed. I parked my car on a random street and found a small motel. It was a crappy, rundown place, but that oddly made me feel safer. I slept with my lethal gun in hand and my tranqa nearby. I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep much, but it would only be worse for me if Delilah did come and I was too exhausted to fight back. The night went by with no incidents, and I was called early in the morning once again. It turns out 2 experiments had been spotted together. They had stolen a car and were on the road, trying to leave the city. The people back at the facility slowed them down as much as possible with stoplights. They wanted me and one of the other hunters to meet up and follow them. They could possibly lead us to more of the escaped. I quickly met up with one of the hunters from before. He was probably in his mid-30s, so he had been doing this much longer than I had. Luckily, we were able to catch sight of the stolen vehicle just before it left town. Despite knowing they had been slowed down, it seemed too easy. The car began taking back roads and eventually pulled into an old cabin. Despite us being the only car behind it for most of the time, it didn't seem to show any unusual behavior, as if they knew we were following. The other hunter pulled over a short distance from the cabin and began readying himself. I felt a growing sense of dread. This is obviously a trap, I thought. Maybe I could call for backup, but the other hunter stopped me. Listen, kid, I've been at this a long time and I know this is probably a trap. But do you really think they're going to send anybody to help us? We're on our own. You can either help me or sit out here and wait. I'm going in, he said, his tone cold. Well, after you, I suppose, I replied, resigned to the fact that he was probably right. The government didn't care much about us. They would probably have just scolded me and asked what I was waiting for, so I began to gear up as well. Death might be favorable compared to whatever Delilah wanted to do with me. The other hunter and I exited the vehicle and made our way as stealthily as possible in daylight. Once we reached the door, the hunter made a countdown of 3 before throwing some sort of grenade through the front window. It exploded in a gas, quickly filling the home. I couldn't help but wonder why I'd never gotten access to these grenades before. After the gas mostly dispersed, we covered our noses with our shirts and went inside. We instantly found one of the experiments unconscious on the floor. If I remembered correctly, her codename was Trauma. By touching someone, she could force them to see their worst nightmares. I guess since waterboarding is too inhumane, she must be the solution. The other hunter began to make his way over to her and started restraining her while I watched his back. He was almost done when everything went black. When I came to, I saw the other hunter tied to a chair in front of me. He was still unconscious. I looked down to see I was in the same situation, firmly tied down. Finally awake, a male voice to my side said. I turned to look. It was the man from before, the one who had walked through the wall. He was also sitting in a chair, but he wasn't tied up. I doubted any sort of bindings could hold him anyway. On his lap sat a doll, its hood pulled up just enough to cover its eyes. It's actually a bit funny. Last time we met, I gave you someone tied up in a chair, and now you yourself are tied up, he said, almost amused. What do you want? I replied. Not in the mood for games, not that I had much of a choice. I told you Delilah was coming to pick you up, but instead you came to see her yourself. How sweet of you, he said, smiling. Did you really miss me that much? Delilah finally spoke. Can you just kill me already, or do whatever you're going to do with me? I responded, my patience wearing thin. I told you, I let the bad ones live. And you've been quite bad recently, killing that poor man Jack. It was a bit fast, but I'm sure you still enjoyed it, Delilah said, her voice laced with mockery. I just did what I was told. He knew what he signed up for, I retorted. Yes, he did. The rest of us aren't so fortunate to have our lives turned into games by the government. The only difference between us is that you had a choice. The rest of the experiments and myself never had the luxury of knowing what they were getting into, Delilah replied. So what do you want? To overthrow the government and expose them or something? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Delilah began to laugh. Oh heavens, no. They are far too powerful for that, and there are too few of us to even think about challenging them. No, I simply don't care enough for something like that. Instead, I simply wanted you. What do you want from me? I may have done terrible things, but I'm still nothing like you, I replied, hoping to find some way out of this situation. Oh, maybe not yet, but you will be soon enough, Delilah said. As she spoke, two new people entered the room. They were both wearing lab coats. One held a syringe, and once he reached me, he plunged it into my arm, releasing the fluid. Once again, the world went black. When I came to, I found myself looking at two bodies. One was the other hunter. The other was mine. Both had a bullet hole in their head. This is impossible. I'm dead. Then how am I still seeing this? I thought in a panic. I quickly looked down at myself, fearing the worst. I wasn't wrapped in a doll. I still appeared to be human. I touched my face and the rest of my body. I still felt solid. I was still capable of picking things up. But why was my body seemingly dead on the floor? It's incredible, isn't it? It looks exactly like you, even down to the fingerprints. One of the experiments has this ability, the other is a replica. He's quite dead, by the way, and done with your gun, the man said. What did you do to me? I asked, my voice trembling. The man simply shrugged. Well, it seems as if your body rejected the serum we had planned for you. Rejected it? Well, at least that was one thing to be happy about, although I was still stuck in a room with one of my captors and a dead body that was a replica of my own. What now? Then I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted a direct answer. Since it didn't work, Delilah has one last plan for you, the man said. As he spoke, the door opened once more. Delilah was brought back into the room by Trauma, this time with no hood. I was no longer tied up, but I knew there was still no way for me to escape. So I stood still as Trauma approached me with Delilah in hand. Once Trauma stood directly in front of me, I crouched down and looked directly into Delilah's eyes. I wouldn't fight fate. What I saw in those eyes was pure evil. I saw countless wars, murders, suicides. It seemed endless. I didn't lose control of myself, though. Instead, I quickly reached for the lighter that had been hidden in my shoe ever since Delilah escaped. I flipped it almost instantly and ignited Delilah's dress. She went up in flames, the fire spreading rapidly. There was no stopping the fire. Trauma and the strange man desperately tried to put it out, but it was as if Delilah had been soaked in gasoline. I took a second to smile before sprinting out of the room. I saw several people on my way out of the house, but none of them seemed concerned with me. They were all trying to get to the room where Delilah was burning. I knew the whole cabin would be engulfed soon, so I just needed to get out. Once I made it outside, I quickly ran toward the hunter's car that had been parked nearby. It was surprisingly still there, and they hadn't moved it yet, but the hunter still had the key. So I smashed the window in and hot-wired the car as quickly as possible, then sped off. By the time I drove by, the fire in the cabin was massive. I almost hoped that everyone inside would die, but I remembered they had all been under Delilah's power. It's possible there were some good people among them. I let the thought die as I continued to move forward. I've been hiding out ever since that day, and I know writing this only puts me in more danger. But this story needed to be told. It's almost guaranteed that the government will read this and perhaps send someone after me. But I don't care anymore. I won't be a puppet to anyone not the government, and not a psychotic doll. I'm officially done hunting down the government's mistakes. Reflecting on this story, one can't help but wonder how far would we go to survive in a world where the real monsters aren't always what they seem. Our protagonist, once just a cog in a much larger machine, had to face not only terrifying creatures but also his own inner demons. As he chooses to break free from the government's chains and its dark missions, he leaves us with a troubling question: what do we do when we become the very monster we were hunting? If this thought-provoking ending resonated with you as much as it did with me, don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories and mysteries to uncover together. Drop a comment with your theories and feelings about this conclusion. Your voice is crucial as we continue to explore the depths of these tales. See you soon on the channel.